Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. FPL Vincenzo here, heading into game week 5 of FPL. And game week 4 went very well for me. I played my free hit, 89 points, rank gain from in the 4 millions to like 1.3 million. So one chip successfully used, and a little bit of an emergency pod here because on Saturday night, about 11 p.m, so 3 hours, I think, roughly before the price changes for the evening, I activated my wildcard. And this wasn't planned. Those that listened to me in pre-season would have known that I was looking at game week 12 as my likely wildcard week. I think as the season started and we learned a little bit more, I'd kind of moved that forward roughly to looking towards game week 8 for a possible wildcard, but never really was I intending to play it any earlier than that. But as I say, quite abrupt notice without really, I wouldn't say loads of thought, but it was quite a sudden decision. And it's unlike me to make quick decisions in fantasy football, particularly in FPL. I'm usually quite structured. I like to have a plan. I don't really like to do things spontaneously, ad hoc, or anything like that. So this is me playing a bit differently. But the more I was looking at my team, and obviously on Saturday, I saw what my team was looking like for game week 5. And my team was looking really good on paper. I had 3 Nottingham Forest players, and they've got obviously a good game against Burnley, and 2 Aston Villa players playing against Sunderland, plus plenty of others. So you're looking at, from a purely fixtures perspective, looking at my team looked really nice. But I was still unhappy with it. I only had 1 free transfer. I had money in the bank, but only 1 free transfer. And I kept looking at my team and thinking, I'm not going to like this team for multiple weeks now. I can try and fix it week by week with my 1 free transfer. I can potentially take a hit. But the plan wasn't to do that. The plan was to roll from this point into my wild card and then roll through after and have loads of transfers in the bank at game week 12. And I just saw a world where that wasn't likely to happen. And I saw problems in my team that I wasn't happy with, and I wanted to deal with it sort of quite quickly. So no big elaborate slides or anything here, just some notes. And I'm going to go through these sort of one by one and sort of try and talk through my reason for wildcarding. I'm not going to get into any wildcard team here or anything like that, because if I'm being honest, I'm nowhere near deciding what I want my wildcard squad to be. But I knew that it was time to make it. So five notes here, and we'll talk through them one by one. So part 1 here is persevering with something you don't like or feel like you got wrong. So let's rewind back to game week 1 and some expectations around some of my players. So I had Nikola Milenkovic from Nottingham Forest, paid 5.5 million for him, and I was expecting regular DEFCON contributions and a collection of clean sheets. I wasn't really getting that for the opening few game weeks. Forest had maybe changed the way they played a little bit from last year. We're a bit more focused on possession than they previously were. Teams that have the ball are less likely to get DEFCON, because if you've got the ball, you're not doing defensive things. Forest's possession went up from what felt like 30-40% most of last year into the 50s this year. So a slight adaptation to the way Forest were playing meant Milenkovic wasn't doing as many defensive things. DEFCON wasn't occurring very much, so he was becoming a problem. Then Ange Postecoglou was obviously named the new manager after Nuno was sacked. And I was looking at a few of my players here and thinking, I don't really want you anymore. Milenkovic being one who wasn't achieving what my expectations of him were. And I had Chris Wood as well, who under Ange, there's an expectation that the way Forest play will change again. So for Milenkovic, he'd been used to playing in a deep block. He'd been used to clearances, tackles, all things like that as part of Forest's sort of passive play off the ball. Deep block meant he was good for DEFCON. They had quite a strong structure. We expected clean sheets. say this was already adapted under Nuno, under Ange, I think, based on what we know, and it might not happen overnight. But I saw snippets in the Arsenal game that I didn't expect any of those things to improve. I didn't expect an increase in clean sheets. I didn't expect an increase in DEFCON. So Milinkovic was basically going to be someone with a minimal floor and a low ceiling until I played the wild card. Then you've got Chris Wood, who I bought in for also the good fixtures Forest have now. And the way Ange normally plays is complete opposite to Nuno, that he wants pressure on the ball. He wants a lot of pressing from the front. He has high energy, mobile strikers, all the things Chris Wood really isn't. He's more of a target man, someone to build an attack from. But he's not going to lead the line in that way. There's other players at Forest that seem better suited to what Ange wants. 59 minutes or whatever it was against Arsenal didn't make me think that Chris Wood had secure minutes moving forward. Fair enough, he'd been away with New Zealand on international duty over the break, but I still had reservations on how strong of an asset he was going to be. I also had Elliot Anderson, but I wasn't really factoring my wildcard decision on him, but on Milinkovic and Wood, I was. Then I looked at Aston Villa, where I had double attack, Ollie Watkins and Morgan Rogers. Both of them, again, nice fixtures coming up, starting with Sunderland here, but Villa haven't scored a goal yet. And again, we're looking at fixtures as something, but the team aren't scoring goals. So I had 4 players immediately that I was very unhappy with. And there was a couple of others as well in the squad that I would have put as a yellow on my traffic light system in terms of, do I want you or not? So I was looking at a squad really that had 4 what I would call red flags. Probably 2 or 3 others that I would consider yellow flags, and then the other half I was content with. But that was going to take a long time to sort out, and I was going to look at my team each week and think, I don't really like this. I'm going to jump ahead to point 3 here and link this into it. So Forest and Villa in particular would have been perceived to have good fixtures coming up. On fixture tickers, they will be green. They're against newly promoted teams, lower half teams, etc., etc. But I think one learning from the opening 4 game weeks here is that I don't think fixtures are as important this year. And certainly the strategy to target the promoted teams isn't likely to be as successful this year. So we know from last year, and I'll use Southampton and Ipswich as the main 2 examples here. You felt like in any given game week that if you had players, particularly attackers, against those 2 teams, there was a strong chance your team could score 3 or 4 goals. I think you felt like Southampton were open to letting in quite a lot. I think you thought Ipswich were open to letting in quite a lot. Based on what we've seen through the opening 4 game weeks, and it was backed up, I think, in game week 4, these newly promoted teams are defensively resilient. They're good at getting men behind the ball. They have energy in good parts of the pitch. And they're not going to be the easiest to break down. Maybe by the true elite teams. We've had Arsenal already beat Leeds 5-0 as an example. But we've had, this weekend, we've had Liverpool taking 94 minutes and a penalty to break down Burnley. We've had Sunderland do well defensively again. So I'm looking at what I'm calling mid-table teams here, Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa, and thinking, you're not in great attacking form. Other teams on your level, maybe even better than you, have not found it the easiest to break these teams down. Do I really have hope that Forest and Villa, based on fixtures and colours on fixture tickers, are going to break these teams down? My gut feeling was no. So what I've also got wrong this year, and something to learn from and something to act on when you feel like you've done something wrong, is to change your strategy. I don't think now, my approach at the start was to target these promoted teams. Now, there are some teams I think you can target, West Ham being a good example of a team who look like they could ship quite a lot of goals. Maybe not to the levels of Southampton and Ipswich, but I feel like you can get at them more than the likes of Sunderland and Leeds. So I'm looking at my team and thinking, these fixtures might be green according to this fixture ticker, but I'm not viewing them as green. And I'm struggling right now for any sort of mid-table to bottom half team. I think it's really hard to look at any of those fixtures versus fellow bottom half teams and think there's goals in this. I think lots of games will be quite tight. I think lots of games will, be quite close, and maybe we settle by the odd goal, 1-0, 2-1, these sorts of scorelines. So doubling up, loading up on teams like Villa, teams like, in my case, Nottingham Forest, teams like Crystal Palace, I don't think attacking double ups are a potentially sensible idea now against anyone. I think any team defensively can put up a fight, can be resilient, can get men behind the ball, can retain shape, can be difficult to break down. And the knock-on consequence of that will be games being quite low scoring. I think there's clean sheets in it for the better teams, but maybe for goals, not so much. So I've picked a couple of players here thinking they're going to achieve certain things. DEFCON and clean sheets, not happening. Another team that I think are going to do well scoring goals, they aren't. And now I'm viewing fixtures differently. So those three things are all wrong. And the players I've got in my team are part of my original diagnosis, which is now wrong and needs adapting. And I think that's one of the key things in FPL, that you need to be open-minded enough to adapt, not be too rigid in how you want to play, have alternative plans, exit plans. And I think we've been told for quite a long time playing fantasy games that retaining patience is key. Don't rush into decisions. And the fact now we can roll transfers through and things like that, I think has been even more of a reason to be patient. Because if you can get to 3 or 4 transfers, you're looking at mini wildcards basically and things like that. My strategy here is I could do that. I could have kept my current team. I could have rolled until my wildcard in game week 8, collected 2 or 3 free transfers, probably rolled for a couple more weeks after the wildcard in 8. But I'm missing opportunity now. And is this an opportunity now when other people are being patient? Other people are sort of resting on their laurels a bit. I played my free hit and gained a 3 million position rank increase. Now can I build on that with a wild card and get more gains while other people are being patient? Also factoring into this was potential price changes. So Chris Wood has already dropped in price. And I would be fairly confident before the next deadline that 4 or 5 of my game week 3 squad would also drop. If I waited until I wildcarded before moving these players on, some of these players may end up with multiple drops. I think Chris Wood is open to have 2 or 3 drops in the next block. I think Ollie Watkins could go down. People are losing patience with Morgan Rogers. There's others. I think if I would have waited until my game week 8 wildcard and carried on rolling, as was my initial plan, my team value might have dropped by 0.6, 0.7. I could have had 5 or 6 players that have had price drops, some players multiple price drops. Now, the game isn't solely about team value, and you can always pick a squad with whatever team value you have, and points is more important than value. So if I was genuinely confident the likes of Wood and Watkins were going to get returns in the next block of games, I would have kept them despite the price drops. But I think also on my mind this year is what game week 13 is. It was the main topic of my pre-season wildcard pod. Clear fixture shifts for Liverpool, for Newcastle, and for Manchester City. There's upcoming fixture shifts for Arsenal and Chelsea, etc., etc. I think to get the players you want from these truly good teams, those that will finish in the top 6, you're going to need higher team value. There's a good chance, for example, now by game week 13, the strike force you want is Haaland, Gyökeres, and Voltemada. Or Isak is obviously firmly on radar. Cole Palmer is still an option. Bruno Fernandes is still an option. If you're going in sacrificing 0.6, 0.7 of team value, I think that will come back to bite you in the long term. And I say that this fixture run from game week 13 onwards, running up until really game week 20, there's opportunities there for big gains if you can get the right elite players from the right elite teams. The more you have, I think the better position you're going to be in. So also on my mind was not only the players that I owned that were dropping in price, there was players that I was looking to bring in the coming weeks that might rise in price. I still don't have Joel Pedro, for example, who's likely to go up, I would imagine, again, before I got around to owning him. Cole Palmer could have risen before I got around to owning him. There's Arsenal assets. Gabriel's already gone up once. Would he have gone up again? And before you know it now, by the wildcard in game week 8, you're basically $1 million down in team value because of the price drops your existing players and the price increases to those you want. So again, wanting to have one eye on team value, that was important to me. So now we're looking at adapting and realizing, even though it's 4 weeks of data, that things have changed, realizing price changes are impacting me quite badly, realizing I was probably assessing fixtures all wrong. That's 3 reasons. Then you move on to DEFCON. And on my free hit, I played 5-2-3. Some people in the community thought that wasn't the right play. Playing a back 5 on a free hit wasn't aggressive enough, wasn't attacking enough. In its own way, wasn't punty enough, not enough high upside players, but it worked. I say really, really big green arrow. I think what we've learned so far is, and what I kind of expected to happen from pre-season, was that DEFCON would be one of the most reliable elements of the game. What I didn't quite realise, and I think what is sort of a growing trend and a growing awareness in the community now, is that 3-4-3 or 3-5-2 might not be the way forward. I do think there's a genuine argument here to play 4-3-3 at the moment, most weeks, because the midfield just feels like a bit of a minefield. The defence is, in some ways, to say, quite trustworthy. And I think we have to strike a balance here between how many players we want that we would consider DEFCON picks and how many players we want that are steady picks that will tick along, and how many players we want that are punty picks. And my team wasn't set up well for that. I didn't have enough DEFCON defenders. I also had Elliot Anderson, who was a DEFCON midfielder and was quite unlucky that he kept being 1 or 2 contributions short. I had Bruno Fernandes, thinking he was a DEFCON pick and someone who's a bit of an all-rounder. He wasn't really delivering on expectation either. And I think it led partly by the success of the free hit and just general thought process. I wanted to switch to 4-3-3, and I wanted, I think, 4 DEFCON defenders. There clearly is upside defenders in the game, the likes of Frimpong, 8 Nori, Daniel Munoz. All these guys could still get you big hauls in any given game week. But there's clearly a collection of players that are getting DEFCON often. And I think there are opportunities here for what I'll call premium defences, that there's defenders in there that are capable of DEFCON contributions. And maybe that's caught me by surprise. I'm not surprised that the likes of James Tarkowski is getting it at Everton. I think that was expected. I thought Milenkovic would be another one from Forest. But I wasn't expecting the good teams who have a lot of the ball to get to the threshold of 10. But Gabriel's got it against Nottingham Forest. Virgil van Dijk's got it in a couple of games. Some Chelsea defenders have it, etc., etc. So now what we have is defenders from good teams who have a high probability of a clean sheet, also capable of getting DEFCON, and in some cases, these defenders have attacking returns as well. So if you use that back 3, I'm not saying I'm going to end up with this back 3 on Wildcard, but if you could quite happily go in now with Van Dijk, Gabriel, and Trevor Chalobah, that's 3 of the better defences in the league. You'd expect all of them to be up near the top of the clean sheet standings come to the end of the season. All 3 have obvious threats from set pieces, corners, etc., etc. All, if their respective teams get clean sheets, could get some BPS, and all are ticking over in terms of DEFCON. That's pretty hard to turn down if you've got defenders here who are more than capable of 9 points quite often. Attacking defenders are going to need to get attacking returns at quite a reasonable rate to be matching this. So the game, I think, has moved towards 4 at the back being a real possibility. And I think those that adapt quicker to that will benefit. I do think by sort of the middle of the season, more people would be looking at 4 at the back as a regular thing. Some may even be looking now at playing 5 at the back often. I'm not sure about that. Personally, I don't think it gives you enough upside picks in your team. But 4 at the back, all sort of DEFCON, a mix of those from the best teams, those from middling teams is where I'm looking. So something along the lines of, I say, Gabriel, Van Dijk, Chalobah, Joachim Anderson, Lacroix, Senesi, Tarkowski, these sorts of guys. There's probably about 10 defenders on my shortlist for my wild card here. And I'll work out what combination I want. But I think there's a good chance I'll play 4 of them pretty much every week. There might be some weeks I look to play 5, but I think very rarely now will I be pushing a back 3, because these defenders are quite reliable for getting 4 points. The ones from the better teams are getting more than that. Even say Tarkowski, another clean sheet for Everton against Villa the weekend, another decent haul. So 4 there. And there's midfielders that do get DEFCON. Moises Caicedo's doing it, but I don't think their ceiling's as high as the Tarkovskis. I think Tarkovsky will outscore Caicedo over a season for the same price. I think Everton's clean sheets are more predictable than Caicedo's attacking returns and the little bit of extra he gets for Chelsea keeping a clean sheet. So I'm pushing more change of formation to a 4-3-3. And I'm looking now at, for those that played Sky Fantasy football in the past, I think obviously the rules were very different. But there was, in that game, defenders got extra points for doing certain things, completing a certain number of passes, completing a certain number of tackles in a game. And we tended to not focus so much on the clean sheets, but pick defenders who got passing tiers a lot. So Brighton were a good example in that game. Mostly everyone owned Lewis Dunk, not because they thought Brighton would keep clean sheets, but because he was good for an extra 2 or 3 points every game week because he surpassed 70 passes. I think we're getting that now from the Tarkovskis, the Senessis, the Andersons, that we have to take those sort of defenders more, have to accept them in our teams more readily in this game. Also in Sky, you had daily captains. You didn't have one per game week, you had one per match day. So again, in that game, it was quite obvious to have a 4-3-3 with 3, I would say, elite strikers, because naturally they were your captains most weeks, and use your transfers on shuffling those around to get the best captaincy. I don't think it's out of the question here that at some point soon, my strike force could be something like Haaland, Isak and Gyökeres. That's a crazy expenditure. But if you're having more 4.5 million DEFCON defenders playing every week, I think it's achievable to spend on that premium strike force, particularly if you don't really want the premium mids. I think, say, there's a discussion for separate pods around how Salah's doing. But even if you're happy not to have Cole Palmers and Sakas and players like that, and maybe you have sort of Gakpos, Semenyos, and maybe Mbuemos and players like that as your sort of expensive mids, then premium 3 strikers is doable. So I'm thinking now that might be the way. The strikers from the best teams with the best fixtures, if they take penalties, even better. If they're getting good minutes, even better. And you're giving yourself a higher ceiling of returns. I think those best teams will perform the best in fixtures against the weaker teams. You've got your back 4 all DEFCON focused. And that leaves the midfield open really for punt spots. Now, if you can get one midfielder in there who's a bit more reliable, I think that's fine. But there's enough midfielders here who have high ceilings. The players that could get 3 attacking returns in a game. They're a bit inconsistent. They're a bit what you'd call punty, but they could be good. I think Semenyo is obviously one of those and has started on the positive side of the punt. I think Mbuemo's shown enough for Manchester United that there's returns in there for him. I think Gakpo is getting good minutes and is playing very advanced for Liverpool. He's hard to ignore. Ismail Assar, when he comes back, has chances for multiple returns. I think even Reinders, someone like that, is getting into good positions, and maybe view him more as a tick-along type player in the same category as an Eze, a Xavi Simons, players like that. But so I think my midfield structure is going to be more like that now. That 3 or at least 2 high upside punty picks, so you might get 2 points from a lot, but when they bang, they bang. I would be open to having 3 of those if budget allows. If not, I say there's the Eze, Simons, Reinders types who tick over, and one of them is fine. So the makeup of my 11 is now 4 DEFCON defenders, 3 high upside attackers, and some punty mids. My team wasn't set up to play in this way. I didn't have the truly high upside midfielders. Like Morgan Rogers isn't someone that gets 3 returns. He's a tick-along player and costs too much, I think, to do that when I can have cheaper. I've got, say, Elliot Anderson in there as a DEFCON mid. Don't want that anymore. So the makeup of my squad based on how I see the optimal team set up now is wrong. So another reason to play the wild card. And I said, I kind of mentioned already the last point here that being aggressive when others are being patient is maybe opportunity for big gains and big upside. Why others probably reach the same conclusion as you. And this is what you trust. I'm very much an eye test manager. I trust my strategy, my thought process. I might be wrong. Obviously, wasn't too wrong last year when I finished like 3K. And I trust it this year that this is the way to play now. To have 4 DEFCON defenders, to put the punty picks in midfield, to go with the high upside, safe strikers, even if they cost a lot of budget. there will be options like a Voltamade or someone like that down the lane, even maybe Mateta still at mid-price points who could still be valuable. But right now, I like sort of the power 3 at attack. If others catch on to that 2 or 3 weeks too late, you've got a head start on those managers. So there's my thought process. It was all ticking over in my head sort of all day Saturday afternoon. And then when I saw a big collection of my players potentially dropping in price, other players I wanted on Saturday potentially going up in price, I just thought I need to act on this now. There's no point sort of dallying on this decision. There's no point weighing it up for a couple of extra days and then deciding to do it having lost team value. I think sometimes you trust your gut in FPL. Sometimes something just feels right. And although right now I've got no firm sort of aspiration for a wildcard team. There's a couple of players that I'm pretty sure will be in there, but I've probably picked about half a wildcard squad. Everything else is very flexible, very up in the air. And I probably won't really make any commitments until Friday, maybe even Saturday. I think there's enough going on here with my team that waiting wasn't really an option. So, yeah, that's sort of this pod over. No big groundbreaking talk around players, but just something for you to consider for your teams if you're in a position. See how you feel about fixtures. Do you generally trust certain teams that you have your own assets from in certain fixtures? Have we sort of overestimated fixtures? Have we sort of tried to follow a path that's been successful in previous seasons around fixtures and maybe this year's different? I've reached that conclusion with my team. Are you looking at a lot of players here that you don't particularly want? Are you looking at quite a lot of price changes? And I think working back from game week 13 is quite a good strategy. Look at what you want in game week 13 within reason. Don't be stupid and pick a 120 million price squad, because obviously that's not achievable. But within reason, is it something that's on the brink of being affordable? And if you wait, will you be able to afford it? Because sacrificing 1 or 2 players is fine, but that's a long run from game week 13 to game week 20 of good fixtures for set teams. If you're losing 1 or 2 players that you'd ideally like there by 0.1, 0.2, you could be throwing away a lot of points by having the second option, the replacement, the substitute, whatever you want to call it. It might be worth making different decisions now to help facilitate that in game week 13. That's crossed my mind. Where are you at with DEFCON? Do you trust it enough right now? Do you think you've learned enough? Is your squad set up to maximize that? Because unfortunately, the game is heading in that direction, that we have these secure points that we can benefit from. If you don't like your balance, it's something to act on. And say, where do you feel in the argument of aggressive versus passive? I don't hate the idea of waiting, and maybe wildcard game week 8 gives you a better squad at that point. But what's it at the behest of? Are you struggling now? And do you want to tolerate something you don't like now for a bit longer? So just wanted to flag all of that as some reasons behind my decision. I'll do another pod later in the week talking more about players and my thoughts of a wildcard draft maybe. And I might be I'm not a week late, because say my free hit in game week 4 went very well, but I saw a post from the official FPL channel today that I think 10% of the game played their wildcard in game week 4. Probably more so in their case because they had injuries, which I didn't have. I didn't have the Cunhas and players like that Ismail Assars that are causing people problems. But I think there are probably a lot of managers that were expecting a certain type of season in game week 1, and it's not materialized in that fashion. Are you expecting it to turn around at some point soon to the type of season you were expecting? Or do you need to, again, adapt, change your mindset and get on board with what this season actually is? There's sort of a takeaway sort of thought process for everyone. So yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll be back later in the week with some thoughts around my actual wildcard team and what I'm thinking about planning moving forward. Thanks, everyone.